Welcome back, everybody, to Post Wrestling. It's John Pollock, and today we are joined by friend of the show, friend of the site, overall friend, Damian Abraham. And Damian, it's always great to speak with you. Unfortunately, it's not the happiest of circumstances with the passing earlier this week of Grant Berkland, who competed for years as Danny Havoc and someone that along the way you got to know very well. But first of all, Damian, welcome to the show, and thanks a lot for taking some time to chat about Grant with us.
Oh, thanks for having me, John. Yeah, it actually hit me a lot harder than I kind of expected. And I didn't know him particularly well outside of sort of the context of filming and sort of staying in touch through these incredibly verbose emails that he would write afterwards. But I do think that he's someone that, deserves a little bit of celebrating because he was a really special person.
Now, prior to the Wrestlers, you did another big feature on Tournament of Death from the June 2016 Tournament of Death. Would that have been the first time you met him?
Yeah, and I think I just met him very briefly in passing backstage at the actual TOD itself. Like he wasn't really.
He did the one match in the first round. So, I mean, it wasn't like a year where he went to the finals or anything. So, and you were kind of featuring a lot of different people in that 45-minute piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Him and Alex Colon wrestled each other actually at that TOD in the opening round, and it was an incredible match that actually there's footage of in that documentary where they're having this and it was really the inspiration, I think, that for a lot of the stuff with the Wrestlers on being able to sell Vice on this idea is that they had this match where they're smashing each other with light bulb tubes, but it's almost beautiful to kind of like watch unfold, and it's something that I think most people, when you describe it to them, would be like, oh, that's disgusting, that's grotesque. But then when you're watching the way they actually did the match, it was gorgeous, and not to overstate it, but kind of showing that to Vice. So I think that was a lot of the reason they signed off on doing the Wrestlers. But yeah, like I met him briefly backstage, but we were running around so much, shooting with all the other people there that day, that I didn't really get an impression of him. So when it came time to do the Wrestlers, we're talking about wrestling, and of course, I'm telling the guys that were filming it, Nathan and Jeff, the showrunners of the show, all about deathmatch stuff, and they're like, I think we really want to do a deathmatch episode. And at the time, I was like, well, we kind of did the TOD documentary, like what would you want to do that was different? They're like, we want to do whatever you want to do. So who are the dream people to get? And so, and running down the names, I'm like, oh, Danny Havoc would be cool to get. And it was actually Nathan and Jeff that, through digging into him and researching him, realized that this guy's like, a true artist. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people have said, like, they talk about his amazing graphic design work, or they talk about how articulate he was. He was like, and this is going to once again sound like I'm overstating it, but I really believe it. Like, he's a genius on that sort of like great artist level of genius, where if he was born in a different place, deathmatch wrestling wouldn't have been his medium. Like, he would have found another medium to express himself and probably would have had a different kind of impact on the world than he did have.
It seems to me that, when it comes to like the deathmatch genre, there's going to be a lot of fans that it's just simply that they dismiss, and it's not something that they want out of their professional wrestling. But it seems to me that Danny Havoc would have been that guy that could have explained it, that I think could have opened people's mind to maybe it's not the thing that they're seeking out in pro wrestling, but they can appreciate like the art side of things that often doesn't get focused upon. That seems to be a real constant coming out of, his passing, is just that this was someone that it was certainly, he viewed it as an art form and put a lot of thought into his work.
Absolutely. Like, well, he approached it like an artist would, like he didn't just look at it, in terms of, I'm a physical athlete in this ring doing a physical sport. Here's how I'm going to do it. Or he didn't even approach it as like, I'm a wrestler. Here's how I'm going to be, here's how I'm going to be wrestling. He was an artist, like he would do these incredibly detailed illustrations. Like, we have some of them in the Wrestlers, but you don't really get a scope of how incredible this art was until you see it, en masse. But for every one of his matches, he would like lay it out with these diagrams and invent these incredible weapons that he was going to, use on himself and on his opponents in the course of a match. And he'd draw this stuff out by hand, and like really kind of put that extra level of thought into it. It's not like that scene in the movie The Wrestler when they go to like the Home Depot and they're just picking out stuff to hit each other in the head with. Like, he was putting a lot of thought into this stuff and the psychological side of things. And, you know, he was someone who approached it very much from that same sort of way that a lot of the Japanese deathmatch wrestlers also seem to approach it, which, you know, makes sense because that was who he was looking to, where it was, you know, like the psychology behind the pain and the violence.
Did you ever talk to him about kind of, you're really documenting him in The Wrestlers in the lead up to the end of his career. He's got, his back is significantly messed up and he's looking to walk away. But did he ever speak of, you know, seeing his role in wrestling being beyond the ring or having different ideas to kind of apply some of, you know, clearly someone that saw wrestling beyond just a base level, saw it from a much deeper perspective? Was that something that he was seeking out beyond just, you know, being a deathmatch wrestler?
I think at that point he was just really burnt out, you know, like he was just kind of, you know, like just, you know, and I'm not talking smack about any company or talking shit on any company, but I think the grind of CZW and what he was doing there just wore him down. And I really think he just needed to step away from that, you know, and I think he was talking at the time, like it was right around the time he got married. He was going to leave this and he was going to focus on his marriage. He didn't know what he was going to do. He was talking about writing a book, which is, I think, you know, not that there's not already multiple tragedies happening here, but I think another great loss is that book never got completed, because I think that would have been an amazing thing to read, not just once again for, you know, deathmatch wrestling fans, not just even for wrestling fans. I think for just anyone that was into the creative process, because I would be fascinated to kind of get greater insight into his creative process. Like, we talked a lot about that stuff and, you know, other places he could kind of apply what he was doing, be it writing, doing videos and stuff like that, doing comic books even. But yeah, like he just was kind of really burnt out on wrestling. And I think, you know, the rise of Game Changer Wrestling, you can tell that that's what really lured him back into it. You know, like he obviously was still involved with Matt Tremont's H2O thing, but I think, you know, the possibility that Game Changer Wrestling kind of had and offered and all his friends being there, I think that really, you know, I think rekindled a love of professional wrestling for him from the sounds of it.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just shocking his age as well, that he had just turned 34. We're talking about like he's kind of getting out of wrestling at 2017 and then just came back this year for wrestled last year, I think a one-off, and then did the shows in Japan this year. But this was someone extremely young, and that to me was just stunning. Like, you know, this was not an older guy, but that was like just turned 34 a few days earlier. Yeah, no, I think, you know, once again, not that there's not enough tragedies in the story, but his age is definitely, you know, it's so sad. And I think it really tells you how extreme that side of professional wrestling is. Like, we already talk about the burnout in pro wrestling coming in your late 40s or your, you know, 50s, where your body just can't do what it used to do, you know, probably earlier than that. But in deathmatch wrestling, like it's a much shorter window, because what you're doing to yourself is that much more extreme in some cases. How was he when it came to you wanting to profile him and, you know, his openness to that and sitting down, getting to speak with him? Was he a fairly open book about the process? Was he at all apprehensive at all in terms of, you know, putting a spotlight on himself? He was really open. And I think he was just at a point where he was kind of looking at this as being the end of his career. And I think he was just really excited to kind of get to talk about, you know, what he did in sort of different terms, you know, than he had before, you know, talking about it in terms of the creative process. And I think all credit to Nathan and Jeff, once again, on the wrestlers for this, but they really wanted to kind of give all the guys, especially in the deathmatch episode, the opportunity to kind of like explain like what is the appeal of this? Like, why are you doing this? And he is someone who, being as articulate as he was, being as smart as he was, like almost intimidatingly so, but he was just so not intimidating that it didn't, you know, really come off that way. But, you know, he just, you know, sat down and just loved kind of like talking with us. Like, I think we talked with him for a good
I don't know, 4 hours the day after his last match at the CZW dojo, and just, he just was, incredibly open, incredibly beat up. It was, there's a lot of stuff in that episode. I think we talked about it even when we did the wrap up episode, that unfortunately, because we were profiling so many people once again, like, that didn't make it in there. But I think just the way he cared about other wrestlers, like, as open as he was, like, his big concern was Alex Colon, who actually nearly died the night before. He, in that final move where he puts him through that 2 sheets of glass with all the light bulb tubes in the middle, it actually cut off the top of Alex's head, and he actually nearly bled out in the hospital that night. So Danny was, as open as he was, and as forthcoming as he was during that interview, he was also, really worried, really concerned about Alex, and, who's one of his really close friends. And he described him as such too, right? Like, that's, one of his best buddies. So, like, he really cared about people too, which, in a very genuine, not just because they're coworkers kind of way, like a really, really compassionate kind of way too.
Well, it's great that scene you had in there where it's the night of the retirement match, and they have the speech in the locker room. Sami Callihan is there kind of giving the speech, and like, you really get the sense in that locker room, like, Danny Havoc is the leader. Like, he is the guy that at that point for 12 years has been a constant with this company, and they very much viewed him as this legend of this company.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And he was that, that kind of like moral compass, in a way too. Like, he was just a genuine human being. And, that locker room had, has had a lot of interesting characters kind of come and go, and not to diminish, like, the intelligence or the work of anyone that was in that room. But he just was like that kind of special person that if he was in any room, he would be that special person, like, not just a wrestling locker room. You put him in any room and he would be kind of a person that people turn to as being this, thing that they could look to for support or look up to and make them feel welcome. Like, I think that's the thing that's really come out from all these, these stories and anecdotes from wrestling peers of his, is like, what a important person he was to making them feel welcome and accepted.
What was it like for you just to see the level of, tributes that came out in the following 24 hours? I mean, so widespread of people that, you could see were deeply impacted by this, from John Moxley to, you could just run the gamut of people that worked with him, like your Matt Tremonts, but also like right across the industry. This was one that, universally a guy that was respected and echoed a lot of what you've laid out here.
Yeah. Like, I think you can really tell the measure of a person, in the tributes that come out about them after they're gone, and when people feel safe to really say how they feel. And the thing that struck me is the universality of these tributes that were coming out about him. All of them mentioned how nice he was and kind he was. All of them mentioned how articulate he was. All of them talked about these really verbose emails that he would send. And they are like paragraphs, thousands and thousands of words. I think that, and also talks about what an amazing artist he was and an amazing wrestler too. Like, I think that's the other thing, is like, he really brought something special to the style of wrestling he chose. I think that's the thing that really struck me, is like, you read someone like Kevin Owens, and then you read, a friend of his like Drew Gulak, who he was very close with. But then you also just read like, random deathmatch wrestlers, random deathmatch legends, people pouring in tributes from Japan. Like, it really feels like he, had that connection with people around the world.
And as well in the episode of the wrestlers, of course, Jun Kasai is very much focused on in that episode as well. And that's really his springboard to realizing I can do this, by him watching Jun Kasai and saying, hey, this is happening. Jun Kasai was over here in America at the time, and leading him to go to Philadelphia. And then from there, he's starting with CZW at age 18 in 2005. Yeah, no,
I think that was the thing he was most happy about with the wrestlers episode, was the fact that we were also featuring Jun Kasai in the same episode. And he was just really excited that story was going to be told, and that inspiration was kind of going to be laid out there. And, to be honest, I haven't, I follow Jun on social media, but with everything that's happening right now, I haven't checked in to see if he put up any tributes yet. But I would imagine there was that kind of mutual respect. Like, I think talking to Jun Kasai about, like, who else we were featuring. Obviously, Onita and I think Jun Kasai have a little more complex of a relationship, but I think with Danny Havoc, it was very cut and dry. He was very excited and very happy to hear that we were going to feature him and wanted us to say hi to him when we were going to see him again and things like that. So I think it was a mutual respect. So
did he talk to you a bit about what it meant for him to be able to go over there for Japan, for Big Japan? Because I'd just be curious if that was kind of like one of those bucket list items for him, and that carried weight for him going over there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I don't know if he even made it into the cut, but he definitely talked about how he put almost Japanese deathmatch wrestling on a bit of a pedestal, and the idea of going over there and being in these arenas and wrestling with these people, like, it was an amazing experience. And we had gone to Japan once to film, but we were going to go again after we filmed with him, and talking to him about it in the lead up to going, he was just, beside himself, like, oh, it's such amazing. Like, I want to go back so badly. Like, I really think that's a lot of the reason, he was drawn back to the ring is the idea of going back to Japan and going there. And you look at the pictures of him on that last GCW tour, which people have been sharing on social media. It just, like, you can tell the joy in his face, in every single one of those photos.
Yeah. And I mean, just getting to wrestle at like Cork-Ewan Hall with one of his last matches. I mean, that was, I'm sure meant a lot to him as well. It's a really tragic story, not just his passing, but his wife's passing of 2 months earlier, which was something I was not aware of. And that to me was just, I mean, it's a tragic story, and I think just compounds, what he was living with these past 2 months.
Yeah, after she passed away, there was a GoFundMe set up that he was completely unaware of. I think that on the post wrestling mail out that you did, the update that you did, you made reference to or you actually put in the whole post that he wrote about it, and he was completely unaware of this GoFundMe until it was already kind of like taken off. And I remember seeing that when it came out and sharing that and just. The GoFundMe when it came out, and just thinking, oh my gosh, I can't begin to think about how this is going to hurt him. Like, and obviously the loss of anyone's partner is going to hurt them, on an immense level, but just the love he had for this woman and the way he talked about her when we were filming, because it was the lead up to their wedding, and he was talking about how this was going to be the new chapter of his life, and that did not diminish. I think that's the thing. I didn't even see the statement he put up until I read your update the other day, and that just tore my heart out. Just because I could just hear him saying that, and just feel that pain, because he loved her so much. Yeah,
and for those that aren't familiar, his wife, Brianne, died April 4th, and it just sounds like it was just a heart issue that came out of nowhere. This wasn't something where she had been sick. It just seems like came out of nowhere. It's you don't recover from something like that. That's, a tragedy that it's unimaginable. So he was obviously, dealing with a lot in these final months.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that's become abundantly clear, is that he was, how do you recover from that? And I think, wrestling is definitely an industry, like any entertainment industry, where, fidelity is something that people view differently, and relationships don't always go forever. But this was something very different. Like, this is, and once again, I never really met her or anything like that, but just through talking to him, you knew that, you could feel that. And so, yeah, you don't recover from that, as you said.
Is there one particular conversation with him or some moment with him that is going to stick with you for a while? And that, you kind of, as soon as you think of Grant Berkland, is going to come to mind?
Yeah, it was the night of the last show. He's laying out all these amazing diagrams that he's done for all these contraptions that he's going to unleash in the ring on poor Alex Colon, and he's showing us through, and he's taking us through these plans, and then he's taking us through the reality. And so one thing that they had planned is he's like, I wanted to get a cactus, like a giant sequoia. I wanted to have it in the middle of the ring, because I thought, like, no one's done this. This would be amazing. And so they ordered this cactus, and it shows up, and it's a total Spinal Tap moment where he gets it out of the truck, and it's no bigger than like a foot. And it's just something that they ultimately did use in the match, but certainly was not what he had planned. And then he also had, all these contraptions with glass designed, and then it was just like, what happened to this glass? First it was, all the glass broke. And then it was like, UPS failed to deliver the glass. And then it was, blah, blah, blah. So it got to the point where the guy who literally builds all the contraptions at CZW went to his house, and now he works at GCW, went to his house and took his storm doors off the house and brought him back so they could make at least one of the contraptions Danny had envisioned for his last match. But just like his sense of humor about this thing that he had worked on for months, and envisioned in his mind, and here he was watching it kind of like spiral out of his plans, but just the sense of humor he kept about the whole thing, and just how just, funny he was throughout this disaster, and still was able to go out there and perform to the best of his ability and put on this match that, all his fans that traveled from everywhere were just, so grateful to get to, experience.
It really has made me think about, this guy just had such a creative approach to, his work, that in this era where we're seeing all of these different like cinematic matches, you have companies like a DDT, that it just seems on paper that he would be such a natural fit to come in and just take something, like we remember with the WWF with like their hardcore division, that, you had seen every hardcore match. It had pretty much become a pattern thing. And then you'd take someone like a Raven who would come in and at least try to change it up to make it, add some creativity to it. I just wonder how much he had really any interest in doing anything beyond what he did do in the industry. Like, it seemed he was very much content on, like, this is my area of the industry that I thrive in. And I'd be curious, like, did he really have that kind of desire to do anything outside, like with, a larger company, whether it be in a creative capacity, in a merchandising capacity, because it seemed that even if physically he was wearing his body down, there were other avenues for him in this industry.
Yeah, like there were a lot of wrestlers that we talked to in the lead up to that episode where we were like, we want to do an episode about deathmatch wrestling. And they'd be like, well, I've done death matches, but I don't describe myself as a deathmatch wrestler. I'm a wrestler. And Danny very much was like, I'm a deathmatch wrestler, and that's what I do. That being said, I really believe that he would be one of those guys that, one of those rare lights that you put into a writing room at a place like the WWE. He would have found his place, and he's that kind of likable and genuine, earnestly likable, that I think he would have been able to survive and bring some really creative ideas to even a place like that, because he just had that way of looking at things, and it just had that sort of sense of the world and that approachability, and just, it's all, I keep saying it over and over again, but it's just a genuineness that you don't experience in anywhere in entertainment, like on any level, like punk rock world, like wrestling world, like anywhere, like even, cannabis celebrity world that I've been in, you don't experience this kind of like level of just humbleness.
Yeah, it's a really sad story. You were the one that alerted me to this on Sunday night, and I know that this has been a trying couple of days for you. So I really appreciate you coming on here, Damian, and just sharing some of your memories of him getting to sit down. I wonder, does that 4-hour interview exist?
Yeah, it's funny. I would love to find all that footage, because I think there's just so much stuff that should be out there, from spending time with him. In the lead up to the match, after the match, and there's like, you could do a whole cut just about his last match of that show. And then we actually ran into him again when we went back to film The Cage of Death. I think it's out of sequence when you watch the show, but The Cage of Death was actually after his retirement match. And he was backstage at that show, and we hung out with him and talked to him about sort of life after wrestling and how much he missed it, and then by that point he was already missing it.
And how many months after would that have been approximately?
Like 3, 4.
Wow.
Wow. his body was feeling a lot better, he was saying, but just mentally how much he craved being back in that locker room and kind of experience things. And so I guess it's, no wonder that he wound up back doing stuff with H2O and then ultimately back doing stuff with GCW. But I think, the amount of stuff that he did shows how much of a wear and tear on his body that first real run it had on him.
Do you remember your last conversation with him, last email?
Well, actually, yeah. Our last email was after the Wrestlers came out, and we're just writing back and forth about it. And and just talking about how happy he was that the way it turned out. And it feels like fucked up saying that, so I don't, but he was just, he just was really happy that we had gotten to meet and do that thing together. And so, yeah, that's a real cherished memory. I'm going to never forget that. And I also strongly recommend checking out Alex Cologne's Twitter, because he's going to be putting up a t-shirt, armband combo pack thing, and all the proceeds are going to go to Danny's cremation and funeral services and stuff.
That's wonderful. Damian, thanks so much. And I mean, I think it's really great too that you were able to document this guy on your series. And for a lot of people, that's going to be their window to learn about Danny Havoc and just see, a little bit into who this guy was and to see some of his work. I mean, that's the power that, you have with a series like that, to put a spotlight on someone that, many people might be learning about this week in the most tragic of circumstances, and others that did follow his career and it got to be featured in a spotlight like the one that you're able to provide.
I feel lucky every day that I got to do that show, because I got to meet these people and got to kind of because I watched Danny Havoc wrestle, and, I'd even been around him backstage doing that first deathmatch documentary. But if it wasn't for really, once again, Nathan and Jeff being like, we got to do a deathmatch episode, and, us meeting Danny Havoc and getting to know this guy, I wouldn't have gotten to see this other side of him, probably till this week, and reading all these other tributes that came out about him. So I'm very lucky that I got to do it, and I appreciate that every day.